I used to believe that marriage meant safety. That once you'd built a life with someone, you could finally exhale. You know that feeling? When you wake up next to the same person for years, and their breathing becomes your morning soundtrack. That was me, until the day I came home from the hospital and realized my entire life had been sold out from under me. I'll start from the beginning. My name is Lauren. I'm 46 years old, born and raised in Ohio, and for most of my adult life, I thought I had it figured out. I worked as a school counselor, my husband Mark ran a small construction business, and we had a modest but beautiful home. A little blue house with a white porch swing, just outside Columbus. We'd lived there for nearly 18 years. Every corner of that place held our memories. The paint on the doorframe had scratches where we measured our son's height every birthday. The kitchen window had tiny water stains from when we used to argue over who'd do the dishes. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Then came the illness. In April last year, I was admitted to the hospital after a sudden heart issue. It was supposed to be a minor procedure, in and out within a week. But complications turned those 7 days into almost 2 months. Those 2 months changed everything. At first, Mark was there every day. He brought flowers, comfort food, and even photos of the house to keep my spirits up. I remember him showing me a picture of the garden saying, "You should see it, babe. The roses are blooming just like you like them." But something felt off. The calls got shorter, the visits less frequent, his tone colder. I blamed it on stress. We were both exhausted. I didn't know that while I was fighting to heal, he was preparing to disappear. On the day I was finally discharged, I couldn't wait to get home. I remember the nurse wheeling me outside, and the first thing I saw was Mark's truck. He smiled. But it wasn't the smile I remembered. It was tight. Forced. Like someone pretending to be kind for the cameras. Still, I didn't want to read into it. I was just grateful to go home. The drive felt longer than usual. He didn't talk much, just kept his eyes on the road. I remember asking, "Did the neighbors take care of the mail?" He said, Yeah, don't worry about it." But there was something in his voice, a tremor, almost like guilt. When we finally turned onto our street, I froze. There was a for sale sign still standing in the yard, except the word Saldi was plastered across it in bold red letters. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the realtor put it there accidentally. Maybe it was for another house. But then I noticed the boxes on the porch, the strange car in the driveway, and a woman, maybe in her 40s, standing by the door with a clipboard. She looked up confused and said, "Oh, you must be Mrs. Jenkins. We weren't expecting you." That's when my heart dropped. I turned to Mark. He wouldn't look at me. I asked him, "What is this?" He sighed. "Lauren, just calm down. We'll talk about it inside." Inside? What inside? There was no inside anymore. That wasn't my house. He had sold it. He had sold our home while I was lying in a hospital bed, unaware, recovering from surgery, believing he was taking care of me, not dismantling everything we'd built. I could barely breathe. The world tilted. The nurse's discharge instructions fell from my lap. I felt my chest tighten again. That same pain that had sent me to the hospital in the first place. And all I could say was, "Why, Mark? Why would you do this?" He just muttered something about needing the money, the mortgage, the business struggling. But that wasn't the truth. I could see it in his eyes. There was more, something he wasn't saying. I'd been married to that man for 20 years. I knew his silences better than his words. And right then, that silence screamed betrayal. The woman from the doorway looked uncomfortable, apologizing, saying she didn't know I hadn't been told. Apparently, the papers were signed weeks ago. While I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, praying for recovery, Mark was signing away the deed to our home and cashing the check. I didn't even know where I'd sleep that night. He had moved most of our belongings into a storage unit. My clothes, my books, even my late mother's photo albums, boxed up without a word. The man who had once held my hand during my mother's funeral had quietly erased me from my own home. I remember sitting on the curb that night, watching the sunset fade behind what used to be our house. It wasn't just a building, it was my identity, and he had sold it like it was nothing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the "Sell D" sign out of the ground and throw it at him. But all I could do was cry, quietly, like I had to apologize for existing. Mark stood there, arms crossed, saying, "You're overreacting. We'll find another place. Another place. You don't just replace a home. You don't sell someone's memories." That night, I went to stay with my sister, Janet, who lived about an hour away. I didn't tell anyone the full story, not yet. I was too ashamed. Ashamed that I hadn't seen it coming. Ashamed that the man I'd trusted with my life had treated me like a stranger. But something inside me was shifting. It was like the part of me that always stayed quiet. The part that said, "Don't make waves," was starting to wake up. And that's when I made a silent promise to myself I was going to find out the truth. Why he really sold that house. And what else he'd been hiding. Because deep down I already knew the sale wasn't about money. It was about her. That night at my sister Janet's house, I couldn't sleep. The bed felt foreign. The air felt heavy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that Saweld sign standing like a gravestone in front of my old life. Janet kept asking what happened, but I just mumbled something about financial trouble. I couldn't bring myself to say the truth. Not yet, because admitting it out loud would make it real. That my husband had betrayed me in the cruelest, most calculated way imaginable. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The first thing I did was pull out my phone and check our joint bank account. What I found made my blood run cold. The deposit from the house sale was there, for $384,000, but it had been transferred out 2 days later. The balance now showed just $17.42. Gone. Every cent. Transferred to another account, not in my name. I felt sick. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the statements. There were withdrawals I didn't recognize, hotel stays, restaurant bills, even a jewelry purchase from a store in Cincinnati. And then a name kept showing up in the transaction memos. E. Carter. Who was E. Carter? I tried to convince myself it might have been a business partner or a client, but deep down, I knew better. That name didn't belong in our finances. That was someone personal. I called Mark's phone, straight to voicemail, texted him, "We need to talk." Now, no reply. Hours passed. I sat on the couch in my sister's living room, just staring at the screen. Janet finally said, "Lauren, what's going on? You're scaring me." So I told her everything. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she stood up slowly and said, "That man's hiding something. You need to find out who this woman is." And I knew she was right. So I did something I'd never thought I'd do. I opened Mark's old laptop. He'd left it behind in the storage unit, assuming I'd never bother touching it. But I did. I logged in with his same password. Our wedding anniversary. I guess some parts of him were predictable after all. It took less than 5 minutes to find what I was looking for. In the Documents folder, there was a subfolder labeled Carter Project. Inside were scanned real estate forms, signed by both Mark and someone named Erica Carter, the buyer. The woman who bought our home. And when I saw the signature, that smooth, looping handwriting, something in my memory flickered. Because I'd seen that name before. Erica Carter had been one of our clients 3 years earlier when Mark renovated her office building downtown. I remembered her clearly. Tall, blonde, perfectly polished. The kind of woman who never had a hair out of place. She had come to our house once for dinner, after Mark said she wanted to discuss business. At the time, I didn't think much of it. She was friendly, charming, almost too charming. But I remember the way she looked at Mark across the table. The way her laugh lingered when he spoke. Back then, I brushed it off as my imagination. Now, it all made sense. I clicked on one more file, an email chain between Mark and Erica. And that's when I saw it. Flirty messages, plans to start fresh, photos of houses they were looking at together, and one message from Mark that shattered me completely. "Once the sale clears, we'll finally have the freedom we wanted. She'll be in the hospital for a while. It's the perfect time." The screen blurred as tears filled my eyes. He had planned it. My husband didn't just betray me. He waited for the moment I was weakest, the moment I couldn't fight back, to destroy my life and run off with another woman. I slammed the laptop shut and just sat there in silence. I wasn't angry yet, not fully. I was numb. Like someone had drained all the sound out of the world. Janet came in, saw my face, and didn't need to ask. She sat beside me, held my hand, and whispered, "We're going to fix this, okay? He doesn't get to take everything from you." But I didn't know how to fix something like this. How do you fix the kind of betrayal that cuts through every memory you've ever had? I needed to see it for myself. So that afternoon, I drove back to my old neighborhood, parked across the street from the house I'd once called home. And there she was. Erica Carter, standing in the driveway, talking to the movers, giving orders like she owned the place. Because now, she did. She was wearing one of those crisp white blouses and expensive sunglasses, the kind of outfit that screamed control. I watched as she smiled, then turned toward the front door, my front door, and walked inside. Something inside me broke then. I wasn't the kind of woman who yelled or made scenes. I was quiet, composed, the let's talk it out type. But seeing her there, moving into the house where I raised my son, where I loved and suffered and built a life, it was too much. I got out of the car and walked straight up to her. When she saw me, her smile faltered. "Lauren," she said, like she'd been expecting me. "Why?" I asked. Her lips pressed together, and she said something I'll never forget. "You were never supposed to find out like this." Like this. What other way was I supposed to find out that my husband had sold my life to his mistress? She tried to explain. How Mark told her our marriage had been over for years, that I was unstable, that I'd want to downsize anyway. Every word made me feel like I was floating outside my own body. I wanted to scream that she was wrong, that I wasn't crazy, that I was his wife. But the truth was standing right there, in the form of her keys jangling in her hand. That was the moment I realized I had two choices. I could collapse, or I could fight. Not for Mark, not for revenge, but for myself. I turned around and walked away without another word. As I reached the car, she called after me, "Is not who you think he is, Lauren." I didn't respond, because by then I knew exactly who he was. That night I contacted an attorney. If Mark thought I was too weak to fight back, he was about to learn who he'd really married. When I left Erica Carter's driveway that day, something in me shifted. It wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was survival. I had lost my home, my savings, and my husband in one blow. But what I refused to lose was myself. That realization came not from strength, but from the emptiness that followed. When you hit rock bottom, there's a strange kind of peace. Because there's nothing left to fear. The next morning, I made my first call. To a lawyer. Her name was Dana Franklin, a woman my sister recommended. Divorce attorney, mid-50s, sharp as a blade, and known around town for her no mercy approach. When I walked into her office, I was trembling. But she greeted me like a soldier reporting for duty. "Tell me everything," she said. And I did, every painful detail. From the hospital stay to the missing money to the Carter transfers. She listened without interrupting, just scribbling notes on a yellow pad. Then, when I finished, she leaned back and said, "Lauren, what your husband did is not only cruel, it's illegal." Those words hit me like oxygen. Illegal. That meant I wasn't crazy, I wasn't overreacting, I was right. Dana explained that in Ohio, a spouse can't sell marital property without the other's written consent, especially when it's jointly owned. She said, "If your name was on the deed, this sale is null and void unless he forged your signature." I blinked. But he did forge it. I never signed anything. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Then we're going to burn him to the ground. Legally." For the first time since the hospital, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about making him face what he'd done while I lay helpless in a hospital bed. Dana filed an emergency injunction within 48 hours. We pulled the property records, and there it was. My forged signature, perfectly replicated, right down to the little loop in the L that only Mark would know. The man who once held my hand at our wedding had studied it well enough to imitate it. When the report came back from the forensic examiner confirming the forgery, Dana said, "This isn't just a divorce anymore. This is fraud." That night, I sat in Janet's living room with a cup of tea that had long gone cold, staring at the ceiling. Fraud. Such a small word for such a massive wound. I thought about how Mark had looked at me the day I came home from the hospital. How calm he'd seemed, how sure. Now I realized that wasn't guilt I saw in his eyes. It was arrogance. He thought he'd gotten away with it, but he hadn't counted on me. A week later, we served him the papers. He didn't even have the decency to show up himself. His lawyer delivered the notice to Dana's office. But later that night my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. The first in weeks. Just 5 words. "You should have stayed quiet." I stared at that text until the words blurred. Not out of fear, out of disbelief. Even after everything, he still thought I'd stay silent. He still thought I was the woman who avoided conflict, who smoothed over arguments, who said, "Let's just move on." But that woman was gone. I screenshotted the text and sent it to Dana. She replied instantly, "Good, he just handed us evidence of intimidation." The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and emotions. We discovered that Mark had opened a separate business account 6 months before my hospitalization. He'd been draining small amounts of money from our joint savings. A few hundred here, a few thousand there. And funneling it into that hidden account under the company's name. And guess who the listed co-signer was? Erica Carter. Together, they'd been planning this for months, maybe even years. He hadn't just sold our house, he'd been building a new life behind my back, brick by brick. The first court hearing was brutal. Mark showed up in his best suit, pretending to be the victim. His lawyer tried to paint me as unstable due to my medical issues, claiming Mark had to make financial decisions in her best interest. I wanted to laugh. They were using my illness, the very thing that almost killed me, as an excuse for his betrayal. But when Dana stood up, she dismantled every lie. She laid out the forged documents, the bank records, the email chain. The judge's expression hardened with every piece of evidence. When Dana read aloud the line from Mark's email, "She'll be in the hospital for a while. It's the perfect time." The entire courtroom went silent. Even Mark's lawyer looked down. By the end of that session, the judge ordered a freeze on all his assets and an investigation into the property sale. I walked out of that courtroom with shaky legs but a straight back. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting. Still, it wasn't easy. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many moments of our marriage had been real. Had he ever loved me? Or had I just been convenient until something better came along? I'd replay our anniversary dinners, our late night talks, even the way he used to fix my hair when I was too tired to get out of bed. Was all of it just part of the act? But no matter how much I hurt, I reminded myself, pain was temporary. What he took from me wasn't my identity. It wasn't my worth. It was just a house, and a man who never deserved me. The turning point came one afternoon when I got a call from Dana. She said, "Lauren, you need to sit down." The investigation into his finances uncovered something else. I braced myself. She continued, "Mark and Erica have been using your old house as collateral for a new property in Florida. They're planning to move." I went silent. So that was it. They weren't just starting over. They were erasing me entirely. But what Mark didn't realize was that the very house he used for his betrayal, the one he sold illegally, now legally belonged back to me. Within a month, the sale was voided. The deed reinstated. It was poetic justice. The same home he tried to steal became the evidence that would ruin him. The court froze his assets, seized the fraudulent accounts, and ordered a full audit of his business. Dana called it divorce karma. I called it closure. That night, I drove back to the house one last time. It was empty now. Erica had moved out after the ruling. The rooms echoed with ghosts of laughter, of fights, of ordinary days that felt like another lifetime. I stood in the living room, looking at the spot where our family photo once hung, and whispered, "You almost destroyed me, but not completely." Because even though he had taken everything, he had also given me something back. My voice. When the court officially restored my ownership of the house, I didn't celebrate. People expected me to. Janet even showed up with a bottle of champagne, ready to toast. But I didn't have it in me to raise a glass to victory. Because this wasn't a victory. It was survival. And survival doesn't feel like triumph, it feels like breathing after almost drowning. The truth was, I didn't even want the house anymore. Every wall carried his fingerprints. Every room whispered lies. I couldn't walk into the kitchen without remembering him sitting at the counter, pretending everything was fine while secretly planning his escape. So instead of moving back, I made a decision. I was going to sell it myself, on my terms this time, and use the money to rebuild my life from the ground up. No Mark. No shadows. Just me. When I told Janet, she said, "Are you sure? You fought so hard to get it back." And I told her, I didn't fight to keep a house. I fought to keep my dignity. That distinction changed everything. The process of rebuilding wasn't glamorous. I moved into a small rental apartment in Dublin, Ohio, barely 700 square feet. It had peeling paint, thin walls, and a kitchen sink that groaned every time I turned it on. But it was mine. No hidden contracts. No forged signatures. Just an honest lease and my name on the door. The first few weeks I cried every day, sometimes for hours. Grief, I learned, doesn't just visit after death. It comes after betrayal too. It's the death of trust. I grieved for the version of me that believed in Mark. The woman who once said, "We'll grow old together," with such innocent certainty. But grief slowly turned into gratitude. Because with each passing day, I started seeing what had been missing from my life long before he left myself. I had spent 2 decades being someone's wife, someone's support system, someone's other half. Now I was learning what it meant to be whole again. It started small. I began walking every morning, around the little park near my apartment complex. Just 20 minutes at first, then 40, then an hour. Those walks became therapy. I'd watch the sunrise paint the sky pink and gold, feel the chill of the air, and whisper to myself, "You're still here? You're still standing." I picked up old hobbies I hadn't touched in years. Painting, journaling, even baking. One evening, as I was cleaning my brushes, I found an old photo of myself at 25, smiling, bright-eyed, before the weight of life had dimmed me. And I realized that woman was still somewhere inside me. She just needed permission to come back. Then came the practical rebuilding. Mark's financial mess left my credit shattered and my savings drained, but I refused to let that define me. I picked up extra hours at the school, started counseling parents and students on emotional resilience. Something I was suddenly living firsthand. One afternoon, a student asked, "Mrs. Jenkins, how do you know if you're strong?" And I said, without thinking, "You find out when someone tries to break you. And you still get up." That line stayed with me long after class ended. Maybe strength wasn't about never falling. Maybe it was about choosing to rise again, even when you don't recognize your reflection in the mirror. Meanwhile, Mark's world was collapsing. The fraud investigation deepened, and the court ordered restitution for the forged sale. He tried reaching out again, through calls, texts, even a letter. The first line read, "I made a mistake. I miss you." I didn't even finish reading it. You don't miss someone you deliberately destroy. I shredded the letter, fed it into a trash bag, and took it straight to the dumpster. That, right there, was the closest thing to closure I would ever get. But healing isn't linear. There were still nights when I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, remembering the hospital monitors beeping while he was signing away our home. There were moments when anger surged out of nowhere. In the grocery store, driving past a construction site, hearing someone mention trust. But I stopped running from those moments. Instead, I let them come, let them pass, let them teach me something. Pain, I realized, is just proof that your heart is still trying, and mine was trying hard to live again. One Friday afternoon, as I was leaving work, I ran into Lisa, an old colleague I hadn't seen in years. She'd heard bits of my story through mutual friends. After hugging me tight, she said, "You should talk about it, Lauren. What you went through could help so many people." At first I laughed. Me? Talk. I can barely think about it without crying. But that night her words wouldn't leave my mind. What if my pain had a purpose? What if sharing my story could give someone else the strength to walk away from their own betrayal? So I started writing. Not for an audience, for myself. Every night I'd open my laptop and pour out memories, questions, realizations. Some nights I wrote letters to Mark that I never sent. Some nights I wrote to my younger self, apologizing for not protecting her sooner. And one night, without meaning to, I wrote a line that would become my mantra. He sold the house, but not my home, because my home lives inside me now. That sentence broke something open in me. I realized that home wasn't walls or furniture or a deed, it was peace. And peace wasn't something he could ever sell. By spring, I decided to take a leap. I submitted a short essay about my experience to an online women's magazine. I didn't expect them to publish it, but they did. Within days, my inbox was flooded with messages from women across the country. Some were divorced, some still married. But they all said the same thing: "Thank you for telling my story." I cried reading those messages. Because for the first time, my pain had become something useful. It wasn't just a wound anymore. It was a bridge. That's when I knew rebuilding isn't about erasing what happened. It's about using it as the foundation for something stronger. One evening, I drove to my old neighborhood again, not to mourn this time, but to say goodbye properly. I parked across from the house and sat in silence as the porch light flickered on. A young family lived there now, laughter spilling from the open window, the sound of a dog barking, and it made me smile, because the house was alive again, and so was I. I whispered, "Thank you," rolled down the window, let the night breeze hit my face, and drove away. This time without looking back. I used to believe strength looked like control, holding everything together no matter what. Now I know strength can look messy. It can be tear-streaked cheeks, unwashed hair, and a voice that still trembles but keeps talking anyway. That was the woman I was becoming. After my essay went viral, life changed in small but extraordinary ways. A podcast invited me to speak about healing after betrayal. Then a local women's center asked me to lead a support group. Each time I said yes, my hand shook, but I said yes anyway. The first meeting, 10 women showed up, all different ages, all carrying stories that sounded like echoes of mine, the lies, the hidden accounts, the slow erasure of self. As they spoke, I realized something powerful. Every betrayal had its own details, but the wound underneath was the same. Someone we loved made us doubt our worth. When it was my turn to talk, I told them the truth I'd learned the hard way. You don't rebuild the same woman who was broken. You become someone new. Someone who knows she'll never be treated like that again. That night, I went home lighter. Because finally, my story wasn't about loss anymore. It was about becoming. I started focusing on things that made me feel alive. I traveled to the coast for the first time in years. No agenda, no schedule, just me and the ocean. Standing on that shoreline, the wind tangling my hair, I whispered, "You made it." And for once, I actually believed it. Back in Ohio, I signed up for a community painting class. That's where I met David, a retired paramedic with paint, splattered shoes and the gentlest laugh I'd ever heard. He didn't ask about my past right away. He asked about my favorite colors. It felt strange, refreshing. To be seen as someone present, not someone wounded. We started sharing coffee after class, then dinners. He never pushed, never demanded explanations. He simply showed up, and that quiet consistency healed more than words ever could. It reminded me that love doesn't always arrive as fire, sometimes it comes as warmth. By that fall, I'd been invited to give a short talk at a wellness conference. The title was simple: When Your Home Is Gone. I walked onto the stage in front of hundreds of faces, hands trembling, heart pounding, but then I saw one woman in the front row clutching tissues, and I thought, she's why I'm here. So I spoke. I told them how betrayal stripped me down to the bone, how I'd sat on a curb watching strangers carry boxes from the house I thought would hold my whole life, how healing didn't happen in one big moment but in 1,000 small ones, like making coffee alone without crying, or sleeping through the night without nightmares. When I finished, the room stood. Not for me, but for every woman in that room who'd ever been left behind and still learned to rise. After the talk, one attendee handed me a note. It said, "Thank you for giving words to my silence." I cried again. But this time, the tears tasted like freedom. At home, I framed that note. It hangs above my desk now, right beside a photo of me on the beach. It reminds me that pain, when spoken aloud, becomes purpose. Even my relationship with Mark transformed, not into forgiveness exactly, but into distance that no longer burned. He ended up facing criminal charges for the forgery and restitution orders that drained the rest of his finances. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. Justice had already happened inside me the day I chose peace over bitterness. Sometimes people ask, would you ever take him back if he changed? And I smile, a calm, steady smile, and say, I already took myself back. That's enough. 1 year after the hospital, I held a small gathering at my apartment. Friends, my sister, a few women from the group. We made dinner, laughed, and toasted not to survival but to transformation. Janet raised her glass and said, to Lauren, the woman who learned that starting over isn't losing, it's winning differently. Everyone clapped. And for the first time, I didn't feel broken, or abandoned, or pitied. I felt seen. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood by the window watching the city lights shimmer. I thought about that girl from part 1, the one sitting in the hospital, trusting that the world outside her window was still safe. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her, you're about to lose almost everything. But you'll find something far greater, yourself. The woman I am today doesn't chase closure, she creates it. She doesn't wait for apologies that may never come. She builds peace from her own hands. And she's not defined by the man who sold her house, but by the courage it took to build a new one inside her heart. That's the woman I became. There's something sacred about writing words no one else will read. It's like whispering to the universe without expecting an answer. That's how my healing deepened, through letters that would never be mailed. It started one quiet Sunday morning. The light was soft through my apartment curtains, the kind of light that makes everything look gentler. I brewed a cup of coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote 3 words, letters to the past. I didn't plan what I'd write. I just let my hand move. The first letter began simply, Dear Mark, you didn't just sell our house. You sold the life I thought we had. But here's what you didn't sell, my resilience, my kindness, my faith that life can still be beautiful, even after people break it. I used to want you to understand what you did to me. Now, I realize understanding is a gift you'll never earn. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to breathe again. When I finished that letter, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt still. It was the first time I'd said his name on paper without anger attached. I folded the page and tucked it into a wooden box. That box would eventually hold dozens of letters, each one a piece of me reclaiming my story. The next letter was to myself. The version of me who'd walked into the hospital thinking she'd come home to the same world she left behind. Dear Lawrence, then I know you're scared. I know you think everything you love is safe because you've done everything right. But sweetheart, life doesn't always reward good behavior. Sometimes it shatters you to rebuild you. When the floor gives out beneath you, remember this: it's not because you're weak. It's because you were never meant to live that small. You're going to cry until your ribs hurt. You're going to hate yourself for missing him. But one day, you'll wake up, and the sunlight will hit your face, and you'll realize you survived something people don't come back from. And that's when you'll finally meet you. I sat there for a long time after writing that one. I could almost feel her, that past version of me, sitting across the table, listening. I wanted to tell her that the pain she carried so quietly would become her greatest teacher. Then came the hardest letter, the one I wrote to Erica Carter. Dear Erica, I've hated you. I've imagined 1,000 versions of confronting you, screaming, crying, demanding why. But none of that will change what happened. So instead, I'm writing this to say thank you. Thank you for showing me the truth about a man I might have spent another 20 years trying to save. Thank you for being the end that forced me to find my beginning. I hope you heal too. Not for my sake, but for yours. Because women like us, we deserve to stop hurting. That letter changed me. I realized that forgiveness isn't approval, it's release. It doesn't erase what they did. It just stops them from living rent-free inside your head. Each letter became a ritual. Every Sunday, I'd light a candle, sit in silence, and write, to my parents, to my younger self, even to my old house. That one was my favorite. Dear home, I'm sorry for how you were taken from me. You were more than wood and paint. You were a witness to every version of who I was. But it's okay that you belong to someone else now. You were never supposed to keep me small. Thank you for holding my memories until I was ready to let them go. After I wrote that, I closed the notebook, blew out the candle, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not the loud, triumphant kind. The quiet kind. The kind that sits in your chest and says, "You're safe now." A few months later, I decided to share one of those letters at the support group. I read the one to my younger self, voice shaking at first, then steadying as I went on. When I looked up, half the women were crying. One whispered, "That felt like you wrote it to me." And maybe I did. Maybe we all write to the same wounds in different handwriting. After that session, we started a new ritual. Every woman wrote her own letter to the past. We read them aloud, burned them safely in a bowl afterward, and watched the smoke drift toward the ceiling. It felt symbolic, letting the pain go somewhere higher, somewhere it couldn't hurt anymore. That spring, I found myself cleaning my apartment when I opened the wooden box again. I read through every letter, smiling at how much my handwriting changed, shaky at first, confident later. Each page was like a snapshot of healing in progress. Then I realized something simple, but profound. Healing isn't forgetting what happened. It's learning to tell the story without crying in the same place. And I could finally do that. So I decided to do something bold. I reached out to the magazine editor who first published my essay and asked if they'd be interested in a follow-up piece. A series of letters titled, "What I'd Say Now." She said yes immediately. A few weeks later, my letters were published under a new headline, "The Woman Who Lost Her House and Found Her Home Inside Herself." It went viral again. This time, the comments weren't just sympathy, they were admiration, solidarity, gratitude. Women wrote, "Thought I was the only one." Men wrote, "You reminded me what betrayal really costs." And I realized for the first time my story wasn't about Mark anymore. It was about me. That summer, I went back to the coast, same beach, same wind, same wide sky. I brought the notebook with me. On the last page, I wrote my final letter, not to the past, not to anyone else, to the future. Dear future me, I hope you never forget how far you've come. I hope you laugh loudly, love freely, and trust again. Not because people won't hurt you, but because you finally know you can survive it. Your heart is your home now. Guard it, but don't wall it off. And when the waves crash, remember you've been through worse and come out shining. Then I closed the notebook, dug a small hole in the sand, and buried it there. Not as a loss, as a seed, because the woman who once lost everything had finally learned how to plant something new. It was a Thursday afternoon, ordinary in every possible way. I was sorting through my mail pile, mostly bills and grocery flyers, when I saw it. A cream-colored envelope, handwritten, elegant cursive. No return address. I almost threw it out. But something about the handwriting, careful, deliberate, made me pause. When I opened it, a single line stopped my breath. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Erica Carter and Mark Reynolds." My hands went cold. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. like I was falling back into that same helplessness I'd fought so hard to escape. The invitation slipped from my fingers and landed on the floor, face up like an insult. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. Then I did what I taught myself to do in moments of shock. I breathed. In for 4, out for 6. Again. And then I laughed. A small, dry, disbelieving laugh. Of course he would marry her, the woman who helped him destroy my world. And of course they'd have the audacity to invite me. It took me a while to realize it wasn't about inclusion. It was about control. About seeing if I'd still flinch. But here's the thing. I didn't flinch. I felt, yes, anger. Disgust. A shadow of the old pain. But I didn't break. I called Janet that evening. "Guess who's getting married?" I said flatly. She groaned immediately. "Don't tell me." "Oh, I'm telling you." There was a long pause. Then, "You're not going, right?" I looked at the invitation again, its creamy perfection now mocking. "I don't know," I said quietly. "Part of me wants to burn it. Another part wants to show up. Not for them, but for me." "Lauren," she began, the warning in her voice gentle. "I know," I said, "but maybe this is my chance to prove something, to myself. That I can walk into the same room as my past and not crumble." She sighed. "If you go, you do it in heels, with your head high, and no tears." I smiled. Wouldn't dream of it. For the next few days, I wrestled with the decision. Every instinct screamed that I didn't owe them my presence. But something deeper whispered that closure sometimes doesn't come in quiet therapy rooms. It comes when you face the ghost on your own terms. So I went shopping. Not for revenge. Not to stun them. For armor. I bought a simple black dress. Elegant, fitted, nothing dramatic. Black, not as mourning, but as power. The day of the wedding, I pinned my hair up, put on a soft rose lipstick, and looked at my reflection. For the first time, I didn't see the woman who'd been betrayed. I saw the woman who survived betrayal. I whispered to my reflection, "Let's go remind them who they lost." The ceremony was held at a vineyard just outside town. Picturesque, painfully perfect. Rows of white chairs, gentle music, the smell of lavender drifting in the breeze. As I walked up the path, I could feel eyes on me. A few whispers rippled through the crowd. Small, town memories never fade. And then I saw them. Mark, standing at the altar in a tailored gray suit, looking older, a little heavier, but still carrying that same smug composure. And beside him, Erica, radiant in a lace gown, her smile polished and hollow. When she spotted me, her face froze, just for a second. Then she looked away, pretending she hadn't seen me. Mark noticed, and for a brief electric moment our eyes met. No words, no nods, just silence. But in that silence, I felt something unexpected. Nothing, no hatred, no ache, just stillness. He no longer had any power in me. The ceremony began. I sat in the back row, hands folded, watching two people make vows they'd already broken long ago. I wondered if they heard themselves. The promises of honesty, loyalty, love. The irony was almost poetic. At one point, the officiant said, "Marriage is a foundation built on trust." I smiled, because I knew. Some houses collapse because their foundation was never real. When it ended, I stayed seated as everyone stood to applaud. The newlyweds kissed, music swelled, and I realized I wasn't angry. I was free. As guests moved toward the reception tent, I walked toward the edge of the vineyard instead. Rows of vines stretching out beneath a golden sky. The world was beautiful again, even here. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small folded note. One I'd written the night before. "Dear Mark, I hope this marriage brings you the reflection you've been running from. You taught me what love should never feel like. And for that, oddly, I'm grateful. I wish you healing, but far, far away from me." I placed it under a stone at the base of a tree and whispered, "Goodbye." When I turned to leave, someone called my name. It was David, the man from my art class. He smiled softly. "You actually came." "I needed to see it," I said, "to close the door." He nodded. And I looked back once more. The lights, the laughter, the distant clinking of champagne glasses. Then I smiled. The doors closed. He offered me his hand. "Then let's go somewhere that's actually worth your time." So we did. We left the vineyard, drove into town, and had dinner by the river. Just two people who'd both learned that endings aren't failures. They're beginnings wearing different clothes. That night, as I stood on my balcony, I thought about how full circle life had come. Once, I lost everything while I was fighting for my life in a hospital bed. Now, I'd walk through the ashes and come out stronger, steadier, untouched by the flames. Closure didn't come from confrontation. It came from knowing I didn't need to fight anymore. After the wedding, something inside me shifted permanently. It wasn't dramatic, No fireworks, no tears. It was subtle, like a door inside me quietly closing, locking itself from the other side. For the first time in years, the past wasn't chasing me anymore. I could finally walk forward without looking back. David and I started seeing more of each other after that day. He had this way of showing up that felt effortless. No pressure, no expectations. Sometimes we'd paint together, sometimes we'd sit in silence with coffee and just watch the world move. He wasn't trying to fix me. He simply made room for me to exist. One Saturday morning, we were driving along the outskirts of town when we saw it. A small, weathered house perched beside the river. The "for sale" sign leaned crookedly in the grass, the paint chipped, the porch railing half broken. But something about it caught my breath. "Pull over," I said. We got out, and I walked toward it slowly. The house was nothing like the one Mark had sold. No grand windows, no polished floors. But as the breeze came off the river and touched my face, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. David smiled beside me. "It's got good bones," he said, running a hand along the porch rail. I laughed. "You sound like one of those home renovation shows." He shrugged. "Maybe I just see potential." I looked at him, then back at the house. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Maybe I do too." A month later, the house was ours. Ours. That word felt strange and beautiful. Not his and mine. Not something built on deception. Something real. Something earned. The first night we moved in, there was no furniture yet, just us and a couple of paint cans. We sat on the floor eating takeout, the river whispering just beyond the window. I remember looking around at the cracked walls, the uneven floorboards, the faint smell of dust, and smiling. It was perfect. Because for the first time in my adult life, a home didn't symbolize status or stability. It symbolized freedom. We spent weeks fixing it up together. David handled the heavy work, replacing panels, sanding floors. I painted the walls soft shades of ivory and sage. Every brushstroke felt like rewriting my life, one corner at a time. One afternoon, I stood in the living room and realized something quietly profound. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of loss. Not of being alone. Not of trusting again. Because now, even if everything disappeared tomorrow, I knew I could rebuild. I'd already done it once. The river became my sanctuary. Every morning, I'd sit on the back steps with coffee, watching sunlight dance across the water. Sometimes I'd write new essays, reflections, small pieces about resilience. Readers from around the country wrote to me now, sharing their own stories of betrayal, recovery, and renewal. Some called me the woman from the hospital story. I didn't mind. That story had given me a voice. And now that voice had purpose. One evening, David joined me on the steps. He handed me a glass of wine and said softly, "You know you're different now." I smiled. "Better or worse?" He chuckled. "Stronger, lighter, like you're not carrying ghosts anymore." I nodded. "That's because I'm not." I finally buried them in peace. He took my hand, his thumb tracing small circles over my skin. "You ever think you'd end up here?" I laughed gently. "Never. I thought my story ended in that hospital bed." He looked at me thoughtfully. "Maybe it did. And this is the sequel." I smiled at that. Because he was right. Sometimes when the river was especially calm, I'd walk to the edge and skip stones. Each one, I imagined, was a piece of my old life. The lies, the heartbreak, the fear. And as it disappeared beneath the ripples, I whispered, "Thank you for the lesson." That became my new kind of prayer. Gratitude, even for the pain. Because without it, I would never have learned how to rebuild not just a house but myself. A few months later, the women from my support group came to visit. We gathered by the river, sharing stories and laughter. They asked how it felt to own a home again. I told them the truth. This time, it's not about having walls to hide behind. It's about having space that reflects who I've become. They nodded. Because they understood. We'd all learned that healing isn't about getting back what was lost. It's about creating something even better. That night, after everyone left, I stood by the water again. The stars shimmered, the river hummed, and the wind whispered through the trees. I felt surrounded by life, quiet, ordinary, miraculous life. For years, I'd believed my story was a tragedy. Now I knew it was a resurrection. And as I turned to go back inside, I whispered one last thing into the dark. "You took my house, Mark. But you gave me my soul." Then I closed the door. On the past, on the pain, and on every version of me that didn't know how to stay standing. The email arrived on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Subject line, invitation, The Daybreak Show. At first, I thought it was spam. Then I saw the sender's signature, Rachel Keaton, senior producer, NBC Daybreak. They'd read my essays, the original hospital story and the follow-up about the River House. and wanted to feature me in a segment called Second Acts. I stared at the screen, half thrilled, half terrified. For years I'd told my story in rooms small enough to breathe in. Now the world wanted to hear it live. That night I called Janet. "They want to fly me to New York," I said, pacing the kitchen. "Hotel, makeup, cameras. The whole thing," she squealed. "Lauren, that's huge!" "I know," I said, though my stomach twisted. "But what if I freeze? What if they twist it into tabloid drama? Then you do what you've always done," she said. "You tell the truth in your own calm way. Nobody can hijack that." 2 weeks later, I was on a plane. I watched clouds drift past the window and thought about how far I'd come, from hospital monitors and eviction papers to a talk show invitation. Healing doesn't climb in a straight line, sometimes it soars. When I arrived, the producer greeted me with warmth. "We'll love your honesty," she said. "Just speak from the heart." I smiled. That I could do. Backstage, under bright studio lights, a stylist powdered my face. I caught my reflection in the mirror, hair softer now, eyes steady. There was no trace of the frightened woman who once begged her husband for answers. The host, Marissa Vance, entered with a kind handshake. "We'll keep it gentle," she promised. "America needs stories about starting over." The cameras rolled. Marissa introduced me. Our next guest turned heartbreak into hope. "Please welcome Lauren Reynolds." Applause. Lights. A small sea of faces. Marissa leaned forward. "Lauren, millions read your essay about discovering your husband had sold your home while you were hospitalized. What was the hardest moment?" I breathed slowly. "The moment I realized my reality had changed without my consent." But the real heartbreak wasn't the house. It was losing the version of myself that believed love alone could keep you safe. The room went still. She nodded softly. "And yet here you are, stronger, thriving. How did you rebuild?" "I stopped trying to go back," I said. "I built forward, one choice at a time, therapy, community, forgiveness, and eventually a new home by the river." "Do you ever miss your old life?" she asked. I smiled. "I miss who I thought I was, but not who I really was back then. This version of me sleeps peacefully." When the segment ended, the crew clapped. A few people wiped tears. Marissa squeezed my hand. "You just gave a lot of people permission to begin again." Back in the green room, I exhaled for the first time in an hour. David texted, "Watched from the shop, you were luminous." I laughed out loud, heart swelling. The next morning, my inbox overflowed. Messages from women and men. Strangers who saw themselves in my words. Some were raw. "He sold everything while I was in chemo." Others were hopeful. "You helped me forgive." I answered as many as I could, one cup of coffee at a time. Each reply felt like lighting another candle in a long corridor of pain. That night I stood on the hotel balcony overlooking the city. The skyline shimmered, restless and alive. For years I'd been afraid to be seen, ashamed of the story that defined me. Now that story was helping others find light. Maybe that was the reason for all of it. Not punishment, purpose. Before flying home, the producer handed me a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten note from Marissa. "You reminded us that healing isn't glamorous. It's gritty, slow, and real. Keep telling the truth." I tucked it into my journal beside my older letters, the same ones I'd once buried in the sand. Funny how life circles back, each loop wider, gentler. When I landed back in Ohio, David was waiting at arrivals, holding a cardboard sign that said, "Welcome back, TV star." I rolled my eyes, laughing. He kissed my forehead. "How's it feel?" "Surreal," I said. "But right. Let's go home," he said. Home, not the house he sold, the one we built. As the car crossed the bridge toward the river, I looked out at the water glinting under twilight. For the first time, I didn't feel like the woman who'd lost her home. I felt like the woman who'd found her voice. It came on a gray Thursday, the kind of morning where rain streaks the windows like half-finished thoughts. I was sorting mail at the kitchen table, bills, grocery flyers, a postcard from one of my support group friends, when I saw it. A plain white envelope, my name written in the same uneven block letters I'd once watched scrawl shopping lists and birthday cards. For a heartbeat, I froze. Even after everything, my body still recognized his handwriting before my mind did. Mark Reynolds. The return address read. I sat there a long moment, the kettle hissing behind me. Part of me wanted to rip it open. Another part wanted to toss it straight into the trash. But healing had taught me that avoidance isn't the same as peace. So I poured my tea, carried the envelope to the window seat, and opened it slowly. The letter was short. "Lauren, I saw your interview on television. You looked strong. You always were. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I finally understand what I did." I ruined the only person who ever truly cared about me. The vineyard housey, it's gone. Erica left 6 months ago. Turns out I'm not easy to love. I'm trying to be better, even if it's too late. I hope the river gives you the peace I never could. Mark, I read it twice. No excuses, no manipulation, no requests for contact, just a hollow kind of honesty that almost sounded like remorse. And strangely, instead of anger, what rose inside me was compassion. Not the naive kind that used to keep me tethered, but the mature kind that recognizes pain without inviting it back in. I folded the letter and set it beside me. David found me there an hour later, still staring out at the rain. Bad news? He asked softly. Old news, I said, handing it to him. He read in silence, then met my eyes. What will you do with it? Nothing, I said. It's not a conversation. It's a period. He nodded. Want me to burn it for you? I smiled faintly. No, I'll keep it. For the reminder that closure sometimes arrives in other people's handwriting. That night I couldn't sleep. I walked down to the river, the air cool and metallic with mist. The current moved slow, carrying branches and reflections. I took the letter from my pocket and read it one last time under the porch light. Then I whispered, I forgive you, but I release you. I tore the page into small pieces, each one drifting into the dark water until nothing was left but ripples. For a long while I watched them fade, listening to the hush of the current, the steady heartbeat of the world continuing on. That's when I realized, closure doesn't always slam like a door. Sometimes it sighs. In the following days I felt lighter, as if an invisible thread had finally snapped. I didn't tell many people about the letter, it belonged to a private part of my healing. But during my next support group meeting, one woman said, "What if the person who hurt you finally said they were sorry?" I smiled. I'd say the apology matters less than the life you build after it. The group nodded. Because they understood. An apology may start healing, but self-respect finishes it. A week later, I framed a new photograph for the living room, the river at sunrise, golden light spilling across the water. Under it I wrote a small line in pens. The tide never forgets where it's been, but it always keeps moving. That became my mantra. Because I wasn't erasing the past, I was simply letting it flow downstream. After I released Mark's letter to the river, life went on quietly, beautifully. The rhythm of mornings by the water, evenings painting with David, weekend group sessions, all of it stitched into a peaceful normalcy that I once thought I'd never feel again. But inside me, a new restlessness began to grow. Not the anxious kind. The creative kind. Every time I spoke at a small event or responded to a reader's email, someone would say the same thing. You should write a book. I always smiled it off. I already have essays, I'd say. That's enough. But one night, sitting at my desk, I opened a drawer and found the wooden box, the one filled with all my old letters. The paper edges were soft from time, the ink faded in places, but the emotions inside still pulsed like living things. I reread them all. The rage, the sorrow, the forgiveness. By the time I reached the last one, the one buried by the sea and copied in my journal, I was crying again, not from pain, but from awe. Because somehow, those words had carried me all the way here. That's when I realized maybe those letters weren't just for me. Maybe they were meant to help others find their way back to themselves too. The next morning, I called Rachel Keaton, the producer from Daybreak. I think I'm ready, I told her. Ready for what? To write the full story. She paused, then said, Lauren, the world needs that book. Writing it wasn't easy. I'd wake before dawn, make coffee, and sit by the river with my laptop. Some chapters came like waves, others like pulling teeth. I had to revisit moments I'd long since buried. The hospital bed, the foreclosure notice, the wedding invitation, even Mark's last letter. But this time, the memories didn't swallow me, they stood still while I walked past them, finally in control of the narrative. I called the manuscript. The house that he sold. The woman that I built. Each section mirrored a phase of my healing, the collapse. How everything fell apart. The ashes, grief, shame, isolation. The river, rebuilding, forgiveness, rediscovery. The home, learning to love again, to trust myself. David became my first reader. He'd sit beside me at the table, glasses low on his nose, marking tiny notes in the margins. This line, he'd say, tapping a paragraph. It hits like truth. Don't soften it. I'd smile. You're ruthless? He'd grin. You're brave. Janet helped too. Catching typos, bringing snacks, reminding me to drink water when I got lost in the work. It took 10 months. 10 months of reliving, rewriting, releasing. And when I finally typed the end, the sun was rising, painting the water pink and gold. I whispered, thank you. Not sure if I meant it for the universe, for the pain, or for myself. Maybe all three. A small publishing house in New York picked it up. They said they wanted it exactly as it was, raw, first person, unpolished in the best way. They didn't want to turn it into a revenge memoir. They wanted to keep it as a rebirth story. The day I held the first printed copy in my hands, I felt my heart stumble. The cover was simple, a watercolor of a small river house surrounded by wildflowers. Under the title, my name, Lauren Reynolds, stood clear and quiet. That night, I placed the book on the same shelf where a framed photo of my old house once sat. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Once, my identity was built around walls someone else owned. Now, it was built around words I wrote. The release came in the spring. The publisher organized a small tour. Bookstores, libraries, women's centers. Everywhere I went, people stood in line to tell me their stories. One woman whispered, "I read your book in one sitting. My husband emptied our savings when I was recovering from surgery. You gave me permission to stop blaming myself." Another said, "I haven't forgiven yet. But after reading you, I believe I can." And I realized, the book wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to every person who'd ever had their life stolen while they weren't looking. On the final stop of the tour, the bookstore was small, cozy, lined with fairy lights. When I finished reading an excerpt, the part about watching the moving truck from the hospital window, the audience was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone did. I didn't bow or wave. I just pressed a hand to my chest and mouthed, "Thank you." Because the truth was, they weren't applauding my pain. They were applauding the transformation of it. Back home, David and I celebrated with dinner by the river. Afterward, he handed me a small gift, a silver key pendant engraved with the word, voice. He smiled shyly, "For the only house that can't ever be taken again." I touched the pendant, tears stinging my eyes. "My heart." He nodded. "Your voice?" That night, I placed the necklace on the bedside table and watched the moonlight shimmer across the river. The water moved steadily, unhurried, alive. I realized something profound: healing isn't a single act. It's a lifetime of choosing softness after hardness, love after betrayal, creation after destruction. I didn't just survive what he did. I authored it, and in doing so, I rewrote the ending. It took me 3 years to go back. Not out of fear, just timing. I didn't plan it. I was on my way to a book event in Charleston, and the GPS wrote past within 15 miles of the old neighborhood. For a while I just stared at the map, pulse quickening, thumb hovering over reroute. But then I thought, maybe the road is inviting me, not haunting me. So I kept driving. The closer I got, the more memories began to rise like fog. The grocery store where Mark and I used to argue about brands. The coffee shop where I wrote my first short story while waiting for his calls that never came. The street corner where the moving truck once idled while I lay in a hospital bed miles away. Every landmark felt both intimate and foreign, like an old photograph you can't quite recognize anymore. When I finally turned onto our old street, my breath caught. It looked smaller, narrower. Maybe because I'd grown. The house stood at the end of the block. Or rather, a house did. Ours was gone. In its place was a modern structure, pale wood, glass panels, a wraparound porch. Different shape, different soul. But beneath it, the same patch of earth that had once held my laughter, my heartbreak, my beginnings. I parked across the street and sat there for a long while. The new owners had planted hydrangeas where my rose bushes used to be. Children's toys scattered across the lawn. Someone else's life was thriving on the bones of mine. And instead of pain, I felt gratitude. Because life went on. And that's the point. After a while, a woman stepped out onto the porch, mid-30s, holding a mug of coffee, hair tied up messily. She waved politely, probably assuming I was lost. I waved back, smiling, and for a moment I wanted to tell her everything. How this place once broke me open. But some stories belong to time now, not to strangers. I got out of the car anyway and crossed the street. "Hi," I said. "I used to live here, a long time ago." Her face brightened. "Oh, really? It's such a lovely spot. You must have loved it." "I did," I said. "It gave me a lot, and it took a lot too. But mostly, it taught me who I am." She nodded, not fully understanding but sensing the weight behind the words. "Would you like to see the garden?" she offered. I hesitated, then smiled. Just for a moment. The backyard was unrecognizable. New deck, new fence, wildflowers everywhere. But the old oak tree still stood in the corner, tall and steady. I walked over and rested my palm against its bark. I'd carved our initials there once years ago. They'd long since disappeared under new growth, swallowed by time. It made me smile. Even the tree had healed. I whispered, Thank you for sheltering me when I didn't know I'd survive. And I swear the wind answered back, rustling softly through the leaves. Before leaving, I took a small pebble from the edge of the flower bed, smooth, sun-warmed, ordinary. Not as a relic of loss, but as a reminder of transformation. I tucked it into my pocket, waved goodbye to the woman, and walked back to the car. As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. The past didn't need watching anymore. It was at peace. And so was I. That night, I arrived at my hotel by the sea. From the balcony I could hear the surf, steady, eternal. I took the pebble from my pocket and placed it beside the river key necklace on the table. 2 symbols, one from where I'd lost everything, one from where I'd begun again. Then I opened my journal and wrote the final entry for the book's 2nd edition. Home isn't a place you live. It's the peace you carry after you've forgiven yourself for staying too long. I set down the pen and let the sound of the waves fill the silence. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the horizon. I walked barefoot to the shoreline, feeling the cold sand beneath my feet. When the tide reached me, I closed my eyes and whispered, "You can rest now." And I meant it. For the house, for the past, for the woman who once thought she'd lost everything. Because she hadn't lost. She'd shed. As I turned back toward the road, my phone buzzed with a new message. A photo from David, the river at home, morning light glinting through the window, a mug of coffee waiting on the table. The caption read simply, "Hurry home. The water's perfect today." I smiled, heart full, because now I finally understood. Home wasn't behind me. It was waiting, alive, in every sunrise yet to come.